I'm William Reigle, founder of ChicagoBourbon.org. I'm here with Martin Duffy, U.S. brand representative for Glencairn Crystal and co-producer of Chicago's Independent Spirits Expo. We're here on WhistlePig Farm, and we're sitting down now with Kevin, who is the nighttime distiller. Hello, Kevin.
Hello, how are you?
Pretty good. How are you doing today?
Good.
Thanks for taking some time to sit with us.
No, my pleasure.
So tell us a little bit about your role here at the farm.
So, as you mentioned, I'm the evening distiller. My shift is basically 4 to midnight, but that changes as needs be. And I run the still and make the magic happen. So sometimes it's a little more magic, but I can get my hat and my broom to dance, so
Okay.
things are good. Yeah.
You play music in there while you're distilling at night?
Yep, sure do.
Yeah.
We got YouTube through a wireless Bluetooth hookup or live play, whatever you want.
Actually,
All right.
Have you heard about the effect they say that music has on aging whiskey? Have you read about this?
I have not.
Yeah, I don't know. It could be a bunch of malarkey, but that is a thing now.
A few distilleries we've been to play music in the rick houses.
Oh, really?
The bass heavy music to try and vibrate the barrels a little bit.
Oh, yeah, I could see that.
Yeah.
That would be,
Little
yeah.
Metallica
Yeah.
is probably the most, as far as generating a little maturity in the whiskey.
Enter
Because I don't associate Metallica with maturity, but that's just me.
Enter Sandman, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah. Along those lines, an interesting thing that's when we get fermentation, we have open top fermenters. They're 900-gallon vats that we put 750-gallon batches in. And when that's really active, so the yeast create the ethanol that we're looking for and carbon dioxide as their primary components. And you would swear there's a gas heater underneath it, the way it bubbles up and foams. And sometimes I'll put on some classical music and watch the bubbles kind of go to the music. I was thinking about being able to log right on and watch it happen live.
Yeah, see?
Then you can be part of the process.
That's right. It's interactive. That's good. Kevin, I'm sorry. What is your background in distilling? When did you first get started?
So the truth of the matter is, it's like 8th grade science, really. This is when they start introducing to you vaporization points of different elements and such. And literally I went home and said, hey, I want to do this. And I was taught by an old timer who apparently had some real experience in it. So through my high school years, we built a still, and that was the caveat. We weren't going to tell my mom, and I was going to learn how to weld. So we used a couple of hot water heaters, and back then they were glass lined, like enameled, and put a 20-gallon one inside of a 40-gallon one, got a fire door and a coil. Didn't even have a condenser, really, not a liquid condenser, just an air. He said, so you're going to learn how to run fire too. And we made lots of junk, and we made some pretty good stuff.
And how old were you?
8th grade, so what is that, 12, 13 years old?
So about Jack Daniels. It's like the Jack Daniels story. He was only about 13
Yeah.
when a preacher taught him how. And supposedly, according to their story, he handed over the distillery to a young Jack Daniels because his congregation didn't like the preacher making whiskey.
Huh.
So there you go. Look at that. Huh?
Well, you know.
Foreshadowed Kevin. That's what Jack did. That's all he was good for. Just foreshadowing the coming of Kevin.
And you incidentally picked up a few other skills there, it sounds like.
Yeah, so welding, we did a lot of different stuff. I made my own, here in Vermont especially, we're known for maple syrup. Mm-hmm. So I built the arch that the fire goes in so you could boil sap and make syrup. That was another one of our little things. So we would find an old whiskey barrel and fill it with fresh squeezed apple cider in the fall. And that was back when nobody was really making hard cider. All of the companies now that,
Sure.
So you can't do that today. We were 30 cents a gallon, I think we were paying to fill a 53-gallon cask. And but today, all of that goes to a cider maker of some kind, hard cider maker of some kind. So you're going to pay full retail price. But we would put that up in the fall, whenever that was, September, October time frame. 2 pounds of brown sugar, 2 pounds of raisins, cap it, lay some burlap over the barrel to keep it damp so that no air would get into it. We'd check it at Christmas time, and then when the first run of syrup came off, and usually it was March, first week of March is generally the weather pattern, we would take, Pepsi came in a glass bottle back then, put a teaspoon in each bottle and go up to the keg and fill it. And you kind of had to. It was harsh at times.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes it was really good, and other times it needed the syrup.
But you drank it either which way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Didn't
Yeah.
let that go to waste.
And between the two of us, that 6-pack was more than we should drink. Yeah, for sure.
So Kevin, when did you start distilling here at WhistlePig?
January, the first working day of 2016.
Okay.
So the distillery opened officially in October of 2015.
Okay.
And I came down actually with my mom to check the place out, and just I was telling her all about it, and it's kind of over her head really, but I was more doing it to impress the manager. I had seen the job posting in the newspaper for about 6 weeks, and it just kept showing up, and which I couldn't believe, because I assumed that there were a lot of people in my position that desired a job like that. And job is not giving it enough credit. It's more of a venture than it is a job. So yeah, I looked at the manager a couple different times, and I was like, have I got the job yet? Have I got the job yet? And it all worked out.
So farm stock came a little bit later, and that's the product that is composed partially of what you're distilling here on the farm. When you started distilling, was that in the plan from the beginning to be blending what you were making here on the farm with some of the other products? Not to my knowledge. That there was the statement of becoming 100% grain to glass. But I was unaware of how that was going to actually happen. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, and that brings up the topic. I mean, if WhistlePig started off as a source from Alberta, rye whiskey source from Alberta, and so as WhistlePig goes on, how is it that you guys plan to take what you originally had and keep the continuity? I mean, because typically whiskeys are affected by a change of stills. I mean, even if you keep the same mash bill, the process could be different from distillery to distillery, and so some of the character can change. I mean, how do you guys plan on keeping the continuity from what you started with to what lies in the future, basically?
So I can't honestly speak with absolute authority on that, because I don't know, I'm not in those circles, but what I hear is that the 10-year and the 12-year products will be continue as their own line items, their own SKUs, and farm stock will develop and mature, to use the phrase, to that 100% farm to grain to glass program.
Farm stock will be kind of the flagship eventually.
That's what I believe is on the docket to happen. And again, how that's going to happen, I don't, we have discussions about that all the time, just with our own, in my own circles, in the distillery, with management sometimes, just because they're in the group. So, the question is, do I take the same 20% of our own that crop 1 was released at. And instead of it being a 12-month product, now it's a 24-month product, crop 2. So I'm continuing to use those 2016 stocks. And then as time goes down the road, you wind up with an older and older and older product, but you're still at that 20%. So, you know, now you have to start throwing into the formula, well, how many barrels did we put up in 2016? So that, and how far would that take us on that path? Or do we leave the 2016 stocks just to simply age and go maybe with 30% of a 2017, but still it's 12 months old in the blend? You know, you can run down those rabbit holes all over and over and over on what it is and what you're going to do. There are some limiting factors, the size of the still and the production rate. You know, the column has what we call a resident time in it. So no matter how much alcohol is in the pot, I can only send so much up the column at a time. So there's a limiting factor on production rates.
What is the typical production rate right now? How many barrels are you filling a day?
So with the current format, we do somewhere around 24 to 30 barrels. So when we say barrel, we need to clarify that that's a 53-gallon cask.
Good, okay.
Yeah.
And that's a day?
Yeah.
Wow. And that's because you are doing the 2 shifts. So you're doing daytime distilling and nighttime?
Yeah, and actually we have a quasi-third shift on.
Really?
That shift ends at 5:30 a.m. and then the day comes in at approximately 7:30 a.m. to start up again. Yep.
I would imagine that's going to take some put some wear and tear on the still. You run a still almost 24, and it's not 24/7. It's 5 days a week.
Yeah, so we're 22.5 maybe or something like that. Yeah.
So still, that's a lot of wear and tear. I mean, copper wears out, and I would see somewhere down the line you're gonna have to at least replace parts of the still. Do you guys have a silent season, I should ask? You know, a downtime of like 2 weeks for still maintenance or anything like that?
I believe there is in the annual schedule some forecasted maintenance days. There's not a 2-week window. Some of them are reserved for, we had a failure and we're going to be down, so we'll account for that.
So they're almost like sick days.
Kind of.
Okay,
Sick days for the still.
Yeah. Now, so when you say the still, I mean, my mind's a lot more detailed, so I'm thinking of all the circuits that support the still. You know, the cooling networks, the chilled water, the supply of ethanol, you know, grain, you know, if we happen to have a burp in transport of grain so that we can't make a mash and make a run. Yeah.
Okay.
It's amazing, all the little parts. You know, you look at a bottle of whiskey or a glass of whiskey, and then you think, oh, what is it? It's it's distilled beer. It's liquid cereal, and then you think of all the little stuff. I mean, just as you were talking before, having to plot things out so far ahead. You know, what do we need? How much should we make, and how long should we lay it down for? And
right.
So many different little things that it can make your head spin.
Yeah. And, you know, we didn't even talk about one of the things about aging, I believe is a misconception in the industry, is that, and it comes in this question, so how long are you going to let it age for? Well, it's not a specific number of days or number of years. It's a when it's done, you know, and that's why somebody has to go up and open a barrel and give it a little try and see how the wood has imparted its character into juice.
Is there a tasting panel here that is actually doing the blending and doing that tasting of the barrels?
So we have, he's part of the distillery team. Pete is his name. He's kind of holding the title of blender. So he'll make blends and send out an email that this is a particular time and put tastings. So whoever happens to be around who wants to participate
Okay.
can give feedback on those blends.
Okay.
So it's not a identified list of people as in a specific panel, but
Right.
anybody
Okay.
who's.
And is he doing that with the older 10, 12, 15-year products as well? Are those?
I believe that's correct.
Okay.
Yes, because those, again, there's not an infinite well somewhere
Sure.
of bond number at 1, 2, 3 that we make our 10-year out of it. Those bonds change, and as we just talked about aging, those blends, that bond, right? So that bond might be 1,000 barrels, and not all of those barrels are going to age the same. So it is, in fact, a blend if you want to get real specific about what's happening.
Of vatting, really. I mean,
Vatting, sure.
just because some people think of blends as adding grain whiskey to the mix, whereas
Blended
this is
Scotch.
this is still all, well, even American blends, is a blend of grain whiskey and malt whiskey, or even say a bourbon or a rye and
Okay.
grain whiskey. But vatting, I mean, it's all whiskey coming from your own stock that you vat together. I mean, I'm saying that because obviously you're also pulling, like with farm stock, you're pulling stock from different places, but it is all still your whiskey as far as what you're maturing, you're laying down. Excuse me. Does that make sense? Did I just ramble?
No, you did not. So there's a certain percentage of 12-year from Alberta and a certain percentage of 5-year from Indiana, right? So
Right. I mean,
Well, they're barrels that WhistlePig is purchasing, bringing in,
Right.
and then you're combining, blending, mingling those together.
with our own
With your-
products
right.
to make this farm stock.
that's what I kind of meant. Even though it's from MGP, it's casks that you've selected. They're specifically for your whiskey, and it's not necessarily just hodgepodge whiskey from just about any distillery throughout the U.S. It's very select. I mean, what
It
MGP
is.
makes is very unique to what MGP has. Same thing, I'm sure, with Alberta.
Now, do you have different mash bills that you're working with here?
No.
Okay.
No.
You have one mash bill that you distill here on the farm
100%
for
rye.
WhistlePig. Okay.
100%.
100%. No malt, no other ingredients, just 100% raw rye.
If it's all rye, then are you using a specific enzyme to kind of kickstart the fermentation? Because is that usually rye is a tough one to get to start fermenting on its own?
It's not.
They use barley.
It's a little more distant than to kickstart the fermentation. The enzymes are to convert the polysaccharides, and then even before that, you have to talk about the starch that's in the seed, the berry, the rye berry itself. So it starts when it's still surrounded by the cell wall. Then you imbibe water so that the cell wall will explode, literally, and then you've got polysaccharides. So then we use enzymes to break down those polysaccharides in 2 different steps. The analogy that's used is the alpha amylase is like a clipper going up the tree, and you just clip off all the branches. So then you got a pile of branches. So that polysaccharide is that's the analogous. Not sure I enunciated that properly. Process of that first step. And then the second step is to use a beta amylase. And that beta amylase, if you could picture, your hand is actually a very good example. So yeast need a mono and a disaccharide in order for them to be able to ingest those and have the metabolism happen to create the ethanol. So if I have the branch that's cut off the tree, that's where my alpha works, and sometimes indiscriminately anywhere else along the way. But the beta amylase specifically, this is called the reducing end. So your fingers with their joints, so that beta amylase comes along and maybe takes one, which would be your monosaccharide, and then, or two, your disaccharide. And it just keeps eating off the ends of the branches and producing those fermentable sugars.
Okay.
And then, so it's back to, it's not, the enzymes are not to kickstart the fermentation, but to make it possible.
Gotcha.
Even.
To convert the starches into basically fermentable sugars and.
Correct. You can, we taste those processes. So when you get the starch, and you can't even really, I guess, whole uncooked oats, if you just put cold water on them, and it's just that sticky mass to it, right? But your 1 minute oats have actually had some steam injection to them, which has enough water and temperature to get some of the indigenous alpha amylase and beta amylase in that grain to activate. So if you had a bowl of that and hydrated that, it would have a little bit of sweetness to it. But if you let it set longer and longer, then it gets more of a confectionery sugar sweetness to it. It's difficult with the oats in your kitchen to really have that example happen, but with our mashing process, that's what we're looking for. That way you know that you're beta amylase. So your alpha amylase will create a particular sweetness, and if you've ever had confectionery sugar, you know there's a difference. Even they're still monosaccharide, but a cane sugar and a confectionery sugar have a much different sweetness to your palate. And that's what we're looking for with the beta amylase conversion. And it's like somebody put confectionery sugar on your oats, really, you know. And in this case, we're talking rye.
Gotcha.
And back to the aging process for a minute. You're using Vermont oak for the barrels for the farm stock. Is that right?
That's correct.
And that the oak is being the trees are being grown on the farm, and I understand Independent Stave is creating the barrels for you. Have you had any differences or any challenges that you've come across with using your own wood or your own barrels you've had crafted versus a standard barrel they might produce?
So I think that answer is really yet to come. Our oldest bond, the way we've been labeling stuff in the barrels, hasn't really come to that age of maturity yet. You know, a year is really a very short amount of time with a product that more likely is looking for 7 to 9, 10 years. So that answer is it's ambiguous, but
sure,
it's yet to come. You know, if you ask me that question in 7 to 9 years, and then we can talk about, you know, more detailed on what's the difference between, we do have some that's in Vermont oak and some that's in a regularly sourced, if you will, oak barrel. So as those are being checked side by side as time goes on, I'm sure there's tasting notes that'll develop.
I was going to ask just as far as the expense. I mean, if you're shipping your very specific wood down to Kentucky or Missouri, not sure which Independent Stave you guys use, but they're sending it back down there, and then having it shipped back. I mean, that's an extra expense for a brand of this size. Again, I can see, you know, a Diageo or a Brown Forman doing it, but for you know, you guys to do it, I'm assuming that is an extra expense. Yes.
It would have to be. I would imagine that truly that expense is in all barrels, because not all oak is coming from Kentucky or Missouri.
Right.
Right.
But they have a general stock, whereas you're being very specific about the wood.
Yeah, the chain of custody is certainly would be adding some detailed expense, I would imagine. Yeah.
I would imagine that the overall goal of having your farm stock be made from grain grown on the farm, distilled here on the farm, aged in barrels made from Vermont oak that was grown here on the farm, is a pretty important aspect to the brand, to the story of the brand, and to the overall goals of what you're trying to do. And that expense must be, you know, worked into the process, and you know, you couldn't have that story without it.
Again, I'm not in the accounting department, so I would imagine, yeah, you know, Business 101 tells you that it has to be, but that's part of the triple terroir, right?
Right.
That our wood, our grain, our water. So, yeah.
Well, that's great
Cool.
too. I mean, that's wonderful that, you know, it's a Vermont whiskey, you know, and just bringing all the components together like that, it's really admirable.
Exactly.
Well, thank you very much, Kevin.
Yeah,
Appreciate
quite
your
welcome.
time.
It's my pleasure.
Shall we
We shall.
end it with a toast?
We should. To the future. As it should be.
All right.
You should bottle this.